Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten, coming to you from the eternal capital, the state of Israel and the Jewish people. I am here, well, not in person, with CEO Alex Traiman of JNS. He is down in South Florida. Alex, how's the trip going, my man?
It's going well so far. I've been speaking all up and down South Florida after a few days in New York. And fortunately, we're finding a lot of people receptive to the JNS message and its purpose. And everybody wants to understand what's going on in the war and with the resetting of U.S.-Israel relations. So warm reception down here and not just the weather.
That's awesome to hear. And in terms of the news, last time we spoke, the regime in Syria, the Assad regime, was on the verge of collapse. And in fact, this week, the rebel groups overtook the Syrian regime. And subsequently, the IDF continues to strike at what was left over by the Assad regime, taking out about 80% of Syria's capabilities. We have soldiers now stationed in the buffer zone between the Golan Heights and Syria. We took out their navy. We took out most of their air force. And we're hoping that these rebel groups don't turn their attention towards Israel, even though some have already threatened that they're going to march on to Jerusalem. Alex.
Well, I think, first of all, we have to look at why this happened now. It happened because Iran was significantly weakened. Both Iran and Russia were propping up this minority regime, which was ruled by Bashar Assad. They had a 20% minority of the Alawites, of which Assad was the leader. And once Hezbollah, which was Iran's forward-facing army, was all but eliminated, and once Syria's own air defenses were eliminated, leaving Iran weak, Russia distracted. This is why other rebel groups, I don't think we should even call them rebel groups because, quite frankly, they're terrorist organizations. They have their own interests. But they were able to recognize the weakness of Assad, and they were able to push and take Assad out. And I think that's what Prime Minister Netanyahu ordered here with the immediate move for IDF soldiers to go into the entirety of the buffer zone. And then to take out basically the entirety of the Syrian military, which includes, as you mentioned, the Air Force. It includes the Navy. It includes many of the weapons and all of the air defenses. I think it was an absolutely brilliant move, and I could only see Netanyahu doing it, to be honest. I could almost hear many of the Israeli generals saying, this is not our fight. Let's just watch. Let's see what happens. Assad is better, right? The devil we know is better than the devil we don't know. Not that Israel controlled whether Assad fell. I don't think that they did, but immediate action. And you also get the sense that Israel knew that this was coming. And perhaps this was part of the calculations that Israel took when they entered into the ceasefire agreement with Lebanon, because Israel has always said that they don't want to be operating on different fronts at the same time, and recognizing that they were going to need to operate in the Syrian front. We heard something like over 300 strikes in just a 24-hour period by the Israeli Air Force. So they froze the operation in Lebanon. They moved it to Syria. Another indication that Israel knew this was coming was, if you recall, Josh, there was this unannounced trip by Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer to Moscow. And everybody was trying to figure out, why is Dermer going to Moscow? Well, it's clear now why Dermer was in Moscow, because they understood that Assad was on the brink of falling, and they wanted to make sure that they didn't get involved in a military disagreement or conflict with Russia. And you saw Russia also immediately remove their ships from their own naval bases, which they were keeping in Syria, and their own other infrastructure. They moved it out. So you see that Israel knew this was coming, and they took a major step forward. And the main benefit here, of course, is that you've cut off the supply lines from Iran to Hezbollah. So this is the best move that you could make to ensure that Hezbollah doesn't become a threat over the next several years.
Yeah, in fact, the head of Hezbollah, or the acting head, Naim Qassem, said the Lebanese terror group has lost its supply route through Syria following the toppling of the Assad regime. At the same time, you have this new figure who isn't new to some, Mohammed al-Julani. He actually has a $10 million price on his head. He's the head of the HTS, the main group which carried out this rebellion against the Syrian regime there. He says that he does not want to turn his attention towards the Jewish state. I don't think he can be trusted. As you said, we shouldn't call them rebels. We should call them terrorists. So we're replacing an Assad regime, which we know for years and years has been the butcher of Damascus. And now you have another, essentially an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. You have ISIS elements. You have those who do not like the state of Israel talking about marching to Jerusalem. You have Hamas who are saying that they are in favor of what happened in Syria. If Hamas supports this organization, we know who exactly they are, even though this al-Julani said over the weekend that he is not going to attack Israel at this point. He wants to build his coalition there in Syria, maintain calm. I don't trust the guy. I wouldn't take him for his word. I think he definitely has interests other than ruling in Syria. We learned the painful lesson on October the 7th from Hamas. We thought for years and years Hamas is just wanting to manage the situation in Gaza, keep quiet with Israel, and yet, in fact, they were planning this October 7th massacre for years and years. I see similarities to that. I don't trust this Julani guy at all.
I don't think we should trust any of the groups right now, or most of the groups that are in Syria. We shouldn't trust Julani. You shouldn't, which their group, ATS, is affiliated with Al-Qaeda. There's other groups that are affiliated with ISIS. Now, there are other groups inside Syria, including the Kurds, which I think that Israel could align itself with. And, there's been discussions with members of the Kurdish communities, both in Iraq and Syria, over many years in Israel. And also the Druze communities, which, there's a significant Druze community inside of Israel. And we can talk about that a little bit later as well. But what Israel did was actually make sure that Julani is not going to attack Israel in the near term, and making sure that he can't get his hands on any of the remaining Syrian weaponry. So, I think Israel protected its interests against Julani in an unbelievable move. Real chess move on the board. And so I think that Jelani's correct in when he says that he's not planning on attacking Israel, because if he did, if there was any movement going toward the Israeli border right now, his life is going to be very short. And I think that he wants to establish himself now in Syria. Now, I don't know why anybody would necessarily want to take over the leadership of that place, especially now. It's not a country that is going to be stable for a long time. So we have to watch, but what we've done is created the freedom to operate there anytime that we want. And that's what's important. None of these Syrian air defenses are there. None of the Russian air defenses are there anymore. So don't take Jelani at his word here. Okay. You just have to watch the actions and watch the movements. And if they move the wrong way, I think it's clear that the conception here, the military conception, we call it in Hebrew conceptia, the old conceptia that, the devil that we know is better than the devil that we don't know. That was Bashar Assad. Okay. But now we have a new devil. And if the devil's going to be one that can work with Israel and provide stability for Israel and the Israel-Syrian border, okay, we can work with him. In fact, we could even protect him. But if he's going to cause trouble for Israel, we'll just take out this devil and move on to the next devil.
Over the weekend, you had the IDF chief of staff visiting troops up there in the north, saying, as you did before, that we are not intervening in what is happening in Syria. We have no intention of managing Syria. We are unequivocally intervening in what determines the security of Israeli citizens here. Let's take a look at the IDF chief of staff.
אנחנו כאן כמעט שבוע. הסיבה המרכזית, ביטחון המדינה. אנחנו כאן כדי להגן לאורך הגבול ברמת הגולן, צפון רמת הגולן, חרמון. הייתה פה מדינה שהיא מדינת אויב, צבא שלה קרס, יש איום שיגיעו לפה גורמי טרור, ואנחנו יצאנו קדימה כדי שגורמי טרור לא יתיישבו, גורמי טרור קיצוניים, לא יתיישבו לנו צמוד לגבול. אנחנו לא מתערבים במה שקורה בסוריה, אין לנו כוונה לנהל את סוריה, אנחנו מתערבים חד משמעית במה שקובע את ביטחון אזרחי ישראל פה מאחורה ביישובים ברמת הגולן.
So again, there you have Herzi Halevi saying that Israel's intention is not to maintain some sort of permanent presence in Syria, rather protect northern Israel from any type of attack should the leaders of any of these groups decide to attack the state of Israel. At the same time, you mentioned the Druze. Very interesting. There was a video circulating on social media in the Syrian Golan Druze group saying that they would prefer to be under Israeli leadership, under Israeli rule, rather than be under the rule of any of these groups. Let's take a look at that video.
مغرب حيقلنا إسرائيل كلها على إسرائيل
شو مصيرنا يا أخوتي؟ نحن يا عم باسم أهالي حضر جميع واللي يخالف هذا الرأي يقول نحن يا عمي إذا خيرت غير الشرعي فعليك باختيار الشرع وإن كان هذا شرع يعني موجود نحن نطلب ضمن للجولين ولكن اقل بكثير من الشر اللي جاي علينا، الشر الثاني اللي جاي علينا ممكن ياخذوا نسواننا يا عمي، ممكن ياخذوا بناتنا، ممكن ياخذوا بيوتنا.
So there you have one of these Druze groups over there in Syria saying, if we have to choose, we will choose the lesser of the evils, and we'd rather be annexed to the Israeli Golan. If that doesn't send a message about the situation and the reality of Syria, I don't know what does. A group living in that country saying they would rather be under the authority of the state of Israel, like some of their relatives, whether it's in the Golan or in northern Israel, they'd rather be here in the state of Israel under our jurisdiction than any of these other groups in Syria.
Well, the Druze are their religion, that one of the tenets of the religion is to live faithfully under a sovereign power. And there is no sovereign power in Syria right now. And they're very much at risk, especially if Jolani or other groups, they want to take control, they're butchers and they could pose a serious threat to the Kurdish community. Israel protects its minorities, right? This is an amazing thing that people don't understand. In Israel, you actually have freedom of religion. People are not murdered on the streets because of their faith, even though this is a Jewish state. Only a Jewish state protects Christian faith, Muslim faith, Druze faith, Baha'i faith. So religious minorities exist in Israel. And I think it's a question as to whether Israel should take it seriously and consider doing this. I mean, we've talked about it on the show before. The only way to demonstrate true victory in this war is to take land. Right now, Israel's controlling a buffer zone in South Lebanon, 5 kilometers from the border. Questions of if they will need to create a buffer zone all the way to the Litani River. We've discussed whether Israel will remain permanently in the Philadelphia corridor in Gaza or in northern Gaza. And it's possible that Israel will even annex some of these territories in southern Syria, where the residents of southern Syria want to be under Israeli sovereignty. And, I have to think back to what President Trump said during one of his campaign stops. He said, the state of Israel is so tiny, right? It's such a tiny country, right? People don't realize it. If only there was a way even to make it bigger. And there is a way to make it bigger. And it's not that Israel is going out specifically launching an offensive war to take land, which is exactly what their Muslim enemies do. But when Israel gets attacked, it has to defend itself. It cannot go back to the original borders, because that tells the enemies that they can come up to those borders again and they can strike again. The only thing that really can deter the enemies is to shame them. And the only shame in the Islamic culture is to take land. Killing a terrorist does not shame a terrorist, right? That's so important to understand in the culture. You turn them into a martyr.
Yes.
Greatest honor in the society is to become a martyr. So if you die in the battle, that's a victory. But if you lose land, that's a great shame, and that's a deterrent. And so I think Israel should take it seriously, the opportunity to potentially annex territory in southern Syria.
So we have Syria, we have Lebanon. We're going to talk about Gaza a little bit later in more detail. But at the same time, there is now a fear that the Jordanian Hashemite regime in Jordan could collapse, another domino perhaps falling in the Middle East. This was announced and actually reported by JNS just a few hours ago. Israel's Shin Bet Israel Security Services, their director Ronen Bar, and top IDF brass meeting on Friday. It was a secret visit with Jordanian officials over a concern that the unrest in Syria will spread towards Jordan. Let's remember, Jordan and Israel share. That's our longest border, is the Israeli-Jordanian border. We've brought up the threats in the past. We've talked about Iranian arms being smuggled through Jordan coming into Israel. And and there have been several instances of terrorists who have breached the border or have come over. There was a shooting, I believe, at one of the border crossings, the Allenby crossing, and several Israelis were killed just a couple of months ago. So now we have to pay attention. Israel, by the way, I believe in the process of building another fence along the Israeli-Jordanian border, but there's serious concern in this secret meeting held over the weekend between the Israel security forces and Jordanian officials if the violence, in fact, the unrest spreads to the Hashemite kingdom in Jordan.
Yeah, this has been the concern regarding Jordan for years. The assessment has always been it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. The Jordanian king, Abdullah, he rules similar to Assad. He rules his country with a minority. He is a Hashemite king. The Hashemites represent some 30% of the Jordanian population. Now, we did take a Queen Rania. He married a Palestinian in order to try to unite the factions. About 60% of Jordan is Palestinian. Jordan is a Palestinian majority country. So on the one hand, if Jordan falls, if the Hashemite kingdom falls, if an election was held, and we know that there's no democracies in these places, but sometimes after there's these revolutions, you get the promise of elections and the reality of a singular election. If there was a singular election in Jordan, Jordan would become a Palestinian state because it is by majority a Palestinian state. And then in that case, you might see that Palestinian nationalism, that the self-fulfillment could be attained in Jordan. And in a way, that could be the two-state solution that Israel's always been it's always been talking about regarding Israel. If you remember the British mandate for Palestine, which was all supposed to be a Jewish state, that included all the territory which is currently Israel and all of the territory which is currently Jordan. And it was the British actually that cut off 75% of that territory on the east side of the Jordan River to create this Transjordan, and they imported this Hashemite king, King Hussein, who was running Jordan before Abdullah. I think his grandfather was running it before that originally, but the assessment has always been that at this point that the kingdom of Jordan is weak and actually depends on Israel for survival. So it's going to be a question as to what Israel wants to do if they want to allow this kingdom to fall right now, and it could solve this two-state issue for the future. At the same time, the King Abdullah is a darling of the West. Not that he's in any way a real friend of Israel. He's not a friend of Israel. He continuously incites his public against Israel, playing into the Palestinian street. He's allowed smuggling to take place. He's not a friend, but he relies on Israel. Okay, it's important to note that Israel provides an immense amount of water and also energy to Jordan, for which Jordan is dependent, and the regime is also dependent on Israeli intelligence for its survival, which is exactly what you said just now, that the Israeli intelligence forces were just meeting with Jordanian intelligence forces because they understand what's going on. So I think that I don't think it's likely that Israel would want the king to fall. This is probably one of those cases where they would impose the conception that the devil we know is better than the devil we don't know. If you're going to have Hamas like in Jordan along the border, it's much more dangerous than if they're in Gaza. But it's choosing between two evils. This is the question.
Yeah, it looks like Israel wants to bolster the Jordanians, even though I like the tone of the sound of Jordan is Palestine. And as you mentioned, 78% was given over to those Hashemites, and we'll have to see how that all takes shape. At the same time, turning even further to the east, Prime Minister Netanyahu, I believe for the second time at least, released a message in English, speaking with a translation in Farsi, speaking directly to the Iranian people over the weekend. Let's take a look at Prime Minister talking directly to the residents of Iran.
The historic events we witnessed today are a chain reaction to the pounding of Hamas, the decimation of Hezbollah, the targeting of Nasrallah, the blows we delivered to the Iran regime's axis of terror. And all this came, as President Trump pointed out this week, because of Israel and its fighting success. I want to make clear, Israel wants peace. We want peace with all those who truly want peace with us. And I have no doubt that you, the people of Iran, know this. I know that just as we want peace with you, you want peace with us. But you suffer under the rule of a regime that subjugates you and threatens us. You know what this regime is truly terrified of? It's terrified of you, the people of Iran. And one day, I know that, one day this will change. One day Iran will be free. Women, life, freedom.
So there you have it, a message of hope to the Iranian people, talking about how their own regime is the cause and source of all their problems in Iran, the lack of freedoms, especially amongst women and whatnot. Do you think that this is yet another attempt by Prime Minister Netanyahu to encourage the Iranian people to try to overthrow their government? I mean, now would perhaps be the time, with the weakening of Iran, with the weakening of Hezbollah, with the fall of the regime in Syria. Maybe now is the perfect opportunity for the Iranian people to take control of that country, which would be a major, major boost to the state of Israel. We got one with Syria, perhaps, but this would be a huge boost if the people turn on the regime and go back to before 1979, when those people had freedoms and lived a much better life in Iran.
Well, this has always been the assessment that the only way that you're ever going to get peace between Israel and Iran, and for that matter, between here in the entire Middle East, because of all the countries that Iran has stabilized, is to turn over the regime, to turn over the Islamic Republic run by Ali Khamenei. And there's two ways of doing that. You can do it with military, but there is a history of revolution in Iran. I mean, the Shah was a Western-looking leader, who was modernizing that country, certainly financially corrupt on almost every level, but was modernizing Iran and bringing it closer to the West. But due to the corruption, the people rose up and they wanted to push the Shah out. And that was exactly the same. It's a similar situation to what happened in Syria just last week. And Ali Khamenei, Ayatollah Khomeini, the original Khomeini, came in and he took control of this revolution and established the Islamic Republic to the detriment of the Iranian society. And so the feeling here is that if the Iranians perceive that Khamenei is weak, and it's been reported that he's sick, and all of his military strategy in terms of building up these proxies, including Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis, is now backfiring. Israel's had a stunning victory over these tentacles of the terror octopus. And Israel's embarrassed Iran itself by making it naked in terms of its air defenses and vulnerable to a major attack. Understanding that Trump is coming in now and he's going to significantly and severely penalize Iran, even if only on a financial economic level with sanctions. So if the feeling is that the regime is weak and it cannot put down a revolution, then you are likely potentially to get a revolution. And the way that you get that is to put your support behind the revolutionaries. There was this Green Revolution that popped up in 2008, I believe, and at the time, President Obama put his support behind the Islamic Republic instead of behind the people of Iran. I think that now what Netanyahu is trying to do, and hopefully President Trump will do when he comes into office, is put the support behind the people of Iran and let the people of Iran do the dirty work to replace the regime. And perhaps, and I'm not saying that this would be without bloodshed, because it would not be without bloodshed. You still have the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps that will try to protect the regime. But this could be the least bloody of all the methods to overthrow the Islamic Republic. And at that point, what Netanyahu is also saying is that Israel doesn't have any beef. I don't know what's the better word here for that, with the Iranian people. And I think that you could actually see, without an Islamic Republic governing Iran, some kind of a normalization agreement actually taking place between Israel and Iran. And so if you look at what's happening now across the entire region, You see that Israel is now transforming Gaza and de-radicalizing it by removing Hamas. Israel is in the process of removing Hezbollah completely from Lebanon, and we have to see how that develops, but we got to get Hezbollah out of the political system completely in Lebanon there as well. Now we've gotten the Syrian regime out. And you even have factions in Syria calling for Israeli sovereignty in Syrian territory. You see that the Kingdom of Jordan is now teetering, and you see that the Iranian regime is now potentially teetering, and Israel has already been starting this process of normalization agreements called the Abraham Accords. This happened during the first Trump presidency with these normalization agreements with four Muslim majority countries, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But Israel is transforming the entire region right now. It is unbelievable to watch. And specifically, when you think back to just over 14 months ago on October 7th, we didn't know what was going to happen. And now it's starting to take shape. Unbelievable Israeli victory and the transformation of the entire region on the horizon.
Yeah, we talked about back in the 90s, the new Middle East with the introduction of the Oslo Accords and how badly they failed. And now here we are 30 plus years later, and we're actually seeing a new Middle East take shape, but with normalization with all of these countries. They said it couldn't be done until you solve the issues between Israel and the Arabs living under the Palestinian Authority, the PA. Yet that is not the case at all. We're seeing it happen before our eyes. Let's turn our attention now to Gaza, the situation down there. Top Middle Eastern and U.S. diplomats holding a series of meetings over the weekend, focusing on efforts to reach a ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza, while also discussing the challenges in the post-Assad era in Syria. You still have 100 Israeli hostages alive. Hopefully, most of them are alive, and some who are not alive, unfortunately, being held in the dungeons and the hells of Gaza by Hamas. But you have, at this point, more negotiations taking place. Apparently, Israel says that it is requesting, again, Hamas wants their prisoners, terrorists, I should say, in Israeli jails released at the same time as Israel, of course, wants the hostages home. Israel is saying that some of the security prisoners should be sent abroad instead of being released back into Gaza or into Judea and Samaria. Also talk, perhaps, that Hamas wants Fatah leader Marwan Barghouti, who's a mass murderer, released as part of the negotiation. So it seems like we're talking about this every single week. But now, with the situation in Syria, with the fall of Syria, with the weakening of Hezbollah, with Hamas essentially isolated here, with Iran being weakened, we may perhaps be on the verge of an actual deal. It doesn't look like the sides are completely on the same page, but certainly progress there. And please God, through Israel's force and determination, will force Hamas to once and for all release the remaining 100 hostages.
Right. You have to go back also to the statement that President Trump made, I think just over a week ago. We probably talked about it on last week's podcast, that there will be all hell to pay if the hostages are not released by January 20th. So, a lot more leverage on Israel than previously, both in terms, as you mentioned, the unbelievable successes in the war, and it's becoming clear that Israel is the victor, and it's only a question of how big a victory it's actually going to be at this point, and the complete decimation of Hamas. But now you have Trump coming in and saying it's time for Hamas to release the hostages. Now, I think that Israel has to recognize its leverage and its negotiating power here, and you've heard reports that, Hamas would release the women and the children and the elderly and the injured first, and then maybe others later. I don't want to hear anything about phased releases. I mean, unless it's, okay, on day one, it will be this, and day two will be that, and day three will be this. But I mean, it's got to be a plan now to get all of the hostages living and dead home. And I don't think anybody believes that there's 100 living hostages. At one point, I read that the president of Israel communicated to the Trump team that there might be as many as 50 living hostages. I mean, let's hope that as many of the 100 missing are alive. We're praying for that. And not only the living, but also the bodies of the dead. If Hamas is able to locate them, we want them back too, to give closure to the families, to give proper burial services. So, the deal should be for all of the hostages in one fell swoop. And the second thing is that Israel should not be releasing mass murderers back into society where they will commit acts of mass murder again. I mean, it was the release of Yahya Sinwar and 1,000 other terrorists in the Gilad Shalit deal. They released 1,011 or something.
I think it was
terrorists
27, something like that.
From Israeli jails in exchange for a single soldier, Gilad Shalit, back in, I think, 2006. I have to check the year. But Yahya Sinwar then went on to mastermind the October 7th attack after being released from Israeli prison, after being saved from a life-threatening brain tumor by surgery in an Israeli hospital. He went to mastermind these attacks. So if we're going to release Marwan Barghouti, and people talk about Marwan Barghouti succeeding Mahmoud Abbas as the president of the Palestinian Authority. Like the idea after the Oslo Accords of bringing Yasser Arafat back in, of letting Yahya Sinwar back into the society, that we would allow Marwan Barghouti to come out of jail to lead the Palestinian people. Like, what do you think is going to happen? So these are mistakes. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times. I don't think it's going to happen. So, Israel should demand all the hostages back, living and dead, in one action. It shouldn't be forced to release tons of prisoners. Okay, you want to release maybe a few symbolic prisoners, if you send them into exile, so they go into Turkey or Qatar, but they're nowhere near the Israeli border. If that's the price to pay, Israel will be willing to pay that price. But the idea of releasing hundreds, if not thousands, of prisoners into the Israeli society, I mean, that's a recipe for more blood. So Israel just can't do it.
Barghouti should never see the light of day, that's for sure. And just so there's no delusion here in terms of who Hamas is, even though they seem to be, willing to negotiate or whatnot. Hamas over the weekend publishing a video of the body of one hostage. His identity is not known in a video. Again, more Hamas propaganda. So let's make no mistake about who Hamas is. At the same time, the Henry Jackson Society, a UK-based conservative think tank, over the weekend, stating that the casualty figures from Gaza during the war have been exaggerated, inflated to portray Israel as deliberately targeting civilians. The Telegraph reported on Saturday. Absolutely no surprise here that Hamas combining combatants and civilians, putting them in the same category as one, accusing Israel of carrying out these massacres of civilians, women, children. So no surprise here that Hamas inflating the numbers. And now there's actually evidence-based research done by this Henry Jackson Society showing that Hamas's numbers can't be trusted. It's something we knew. I just hope that the world media pays attention to this reality. I don't think they will, and I don't think the UN, we can count on them to pay attention to the facts that Hamas has been inflating these numbers all the time. We know that Israel has fought a war in urban territory like no other army in the history of the world before in terms of the ratio between civilians and combatants who are killed. I believe it's 1-to-1. Nobody's taken these types of precautions yet. Israel thrown under the bus time and time again by these phony human rights organizations. I think this report was going to be ignored.
Yeah, of course it's going to be ignored because it's not the narrative that anybody in the West and the Western media, which also includes Al Jazeera and other Qatari-funded and Palestinian media, they don't want that information to get out there. So the irony here is that while the International Court has put out arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant for war crimes, and the International Court of Justice is trying Israel presently for genocide in its court, and the UN Security Council and other Western governments and even the Biden administration saying, Israel's killed way too many Palestinians. That's a quote, way too many. What's actually going to wind up happening after this war is over and done with is that military academies are going to be studying what the IDF did in Gaza and in southern Lebanon, the stunning military successes against a terrorist organization, that has embedded itself in a densely populated urban environment and hides itself among the civilian population. And is the state of Israel and the IDF has set a new gold standard for the actions that you take as a moral army to reduce civilian casualties. Everything from sending the leaflets to making phone calls to doing those little taps, with knocking us on the roof. to tell people what's happening, to be moving civilians from one area to another ahead of taking out the targets, destroying buildings and not killing people. And so, again, Israel set the gold standard here. It's going to be studied from military academies for years. The way Israel is doing it is the way no other army has ever done it, and the way that other armies are going to try to emulate moving forward if they have to get into a war situation. So, the IDF just proving itself again to be incredible, effective, efficient, ingenious military.
Another front in this war that Israel's fighting is in Judea and Samaria. Unfortunately, a terrorist murdering a 12-year-old boy in a Gush Etzion shooting, targeting a passenger bus going between Gush Etzion and Jerusalem just the other day. The murdered boy, identified as Yeshua Aaron Tuvia Simcha, the son of a prominent rabbi who manages a yeshiva, house of Torah study in nearby Beitar Elite. I live in Gush Etzion, and when you hear sirens, one after another outside the window, unfortunately something bad might have happened. You always hope it's a woman who's in labor delivering a baby, and it's a good thing. But unfortunately, the other night, a terrorist murdered, taking shots at an Israeli bus, murdering a 12-year-old, injuring several others. The terrorist actually turned himself in the next day. From what I understand, he tried to turn himself into the Palestinian Authority, and for some reason they decided they didn't want him. They wouldn't take him in, and the IDF capturing this evil terrorist. And I'll let you comment on that, but this leads actually into the next story. There's chaos going on. I don't know if you heard about it down in South Florida. There's chaos going on in different towns controlled by the Palestinian Authority. You have the PA taking on Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. There's complete chaos. There are riots in the street. The PA, of course, being accused of being traitors and siding with Israel. But security forces from the Palestinian Authority launching an operation to root out Hamas and PIJ. I mean, this is something they were supposed to do about 30 years ago, which they never did. And I don't know how serious it is. And maybe the reason why this is happening at this juncture. But it looks like that there's street wars going on in Jenin, Tulkarm, and some of these other towns who are under Palestinian Authority control right now.
Well, this is the front that nobody should ignore in this war. And when Netanyahu talks about a seven-front war, the seventh front is inside the country. It's in Judea and Samaria. The IDF has been extremely active, as we've reported many times over the last year or so, in Judea and Samaria, taking out terror factions by Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas, Lion's Den, and other factions in Fatah. And we've seen a steady stream of terror since October 7th, since before October 7th, for that matter. And we've always worried that this whole region could explode. That's why the IDF has been very active. If you're correct that the Palestinian Authority is the ones that are supposed to be maintaining order over the region, and that's why there's supposed to be security cooperation between the Palestinian Authority and the IDF. And I think that the reason why you're seeing the Palestinian Authority launch this operation at this moment, when they should have done it a lot earlier, is that they're looking around at what's happening in Syria right now. The fall of Bashar Assad doesn't really seem to bother Israel that much. The potential fall of Abdullah in Jordan, and the ones that are next are the Palestinian Authority. Right. And Israel has many, many reasons why to dismantle the Palestinian Authority. And if you recall, the Biden administration was saying that there should be a pathway to a Palestinian state, at the end of this war, which would be the ultimate reward for Palestinian terror. It should never be granted. And now the Trump administration is coming back in. And I think that he's going to demand a lot out of the Palestinian Authority. And if they don't deliver, they'll find themselves dismantled. So now all of a sudden you're seeing the Palestinian Authority, which is supposed to be governing their people, taking a stab at, it's taking a stab at removing Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other factions there. And also the risk of a civil war happening inside this region. And perhaps is certainly very dangerous, but perhaps ultimately for the best. So we have to keep it closely. I don't think anybody can predict what's going to happen to the Palestinian Authority in the next 6 to 12 months. But certainly it is, for Israelis, the most dangerous front, because the terrorists are inside the country, right? Hamas was only inside the country for 24 hours on October 7th. After that, they were not inside the country. Israel prevented Hezbollah terrorists, the Radwan forces, from crossing over the border, entering in the country. In Judea and Samaria, you're in the country, right? You have Israeli citizens living alongside Arabs in Judea and Samaria, inside Jerusalem, in all of these mixed Israeli Arab cities. And so this is a potentially dangerous front. We could see an intifada emerge. We could see a civil war emerge. We could see the fall of the Palestinian Authority, or we could see the Palestinian Authority trying to behave itself as it looks like they're doing at the moment.
Alex, we're nearly out of time, but you mentioned President Trump and his administration. Again, we're still waiting for January the 20th until he officially takes over. That being said, Team Trump is already meeting with the Saudis. President-elect Trump, his Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, met with the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, in Saudi Arabia on Wednesday, according to several sources who were briefed on the meeting. So here you have President Trump already talking about normalization with Saudi Arabia, meeting with the head of the Saudi kingdom. And again, we've talked about this before, that the Saudis said that, at least behind the scenes, that they were striving towards normalization with Israel, but it wouldn't happen under the Biden administration, only under a strong president in Washington. And President Trump won the election, ready to take over on the 20th of January, already getting started on possible normalization between the Saudis, Israel, and perhaps other countries as well.
Yeah, I do think that the momentum on this is going to pick up, but I think the war is going to have to come to a conclusion. I do think that President Trump is going to push Israel to get to a conclusion of this war as fast as possible. We don't know what that means vis-a-vis Iran and its nuclear program. And Israel will be permitted to remove the nuclear program of Iran, or whether the United States will participate or take over the campaign to remove the nuclear facilities inside Iran. I think once that happens, you're going to get to a swift end in the war, and then all attention is going to be turned to diplomacy. You remember that Hamas has said that they launched this war on October 7th specifically because Israel was moving toward normalization with Saudi Arabia. And that will be the ultimate victory, is to actually normalize, which was exactly what Hamas and Iran were trying to prevent. So not only will Israel do that, but they'll do it without Hamas in Gaza, without Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and hopefully without the Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic, in power. So again, this is the transformation of the Middle East, which will set the region towards peace. I don't want to say that there will be peace, but it'll be towards peace, for decades to come. Israel will never be able to let down its guard. Any of these normalization agreements are only as good as the paper that they're written on, and can change in a minute if one king gets replaced by another. That's for certain. But establishing relations based on mutual interests, based on the good of the region, and good for Saudis, good for Israelis, good for Emiratis. It's really incredible to behold, and I think that there's tremendous opportunities for Israel and for the Middle East in the coming decades, if and only if they take the opportunities that are in front of them and maximize them to the most positive possible degree.
This is the Middle East, folks. Do not blink for a second. You could miss something. Things are always happening here. Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS. We will see you, please God, next week here in studio. Yeah, you're coming back home.
Well, I'll be back on Monday. I don't know. Maybe we'll record one more time on Sunday, maybe on the road. We have to see.
Let's figure that out. We'll get it done. Thanks to our wonderful technical team, the people behind the scenes to make it happen. That's how we're able to get Alex halfway across the world, including Ryan Lifshitz, Avia Asner, Yari Skvirtsky, Zach Sickerman, producer, and our newest member of the JNS team, Johnny Wallman. Welcome to the club, Johnny. It's great to have you on board. This has been another edition of Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. Go to JNS TV on YouTube for all the latest programming from Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world. And of course, go to jns.org for breaking news from Israel and the Middle East and the Jewish world as well. Have a great week, everybody. Signing off for Jerusalem Minute, Josh Hasten here in the eternal capital of the state of Israel, and the Jewish people. Continue to pray for the well-being of the IDF soldiers, the brave men and women protecting us here 24/7. Have a great week, everybody.